call the meeting to order. How's everybody doing this evening?
Fine.
Good.
Good, yourself?
Good. Everybody, I think, got the email that had the list of transfers. This happened last year. It's the first time I remember this happening, but because of the pandemic, the state allowed the cities and towns, or towns at least, to have this special arrangement to transfer money in between departments without going through a town meeting. The procedure was for if the finance committee and the select board agreed on the transfers of budget dollars between departments, then that would be considered to be enough to make that happen. It's happened before for a couple of other things, usually things that happen at the end of the year, and some special things are voted. Legislature had happened before on some extra money that got voted for school departments one time, and they just required, instead of a town meeting to allocate the money, they just required an agreement between the finance committee and the select board to do that. So that's what happened last year. Apparently the law is still in effect. I talked to Chris the other day. And so he's asked for these transfers between departments. And my understanding is that the select board actually voted on this on Monday night and voted in favor of them. And this was the first time we could get together at the scheduled meeting. So our job is to go through and talk about these transfer requests and then decide what to do about them. I spent some time talking with Chris so I can give you information both about the departments where the money's coming from, why it's available, and the departments that the money's going to, why they're wanted in there. Before we get started, are there any questions? Anything? Okay. The first, let me talk about where the money is coming from. And the big amount of money there is from the Workers' Compensation Fund. And what Chris told me about the reason for the surplus is that there was an over budgeted from a projected basis. And then the audit came in, and the audit used a different kind of set of figures. He used net figures on wages instead of gross figures on wages. And all amounted to, we wound up having a lot less to pay in the insurance for the year. Chris is apparently not certain that the auditor had not met, in fact, missed something. But at any rate, where we stand now is we're told that we don't owe anything more than what we're paying minus this $8,000 for workers' compensation. The second place the money's coming from is from utilities. And on utilities, Chris said a couple of things. One is that our use has been going down, and that winter was a lot milder this year. So he has money left over in both the heating oil and the propane projections for the year. And that had amounted to, there's in utilities coming, what's coming from utilities? From utility, the 48,000 plus 20,000 plus 1,000. It was a fairly big chunk of money altogether coming out of utilities. The third place money's coming from is from highway personnel, personal services. And what happened in that budget was that for 21, we budgeted for a new employee who was an operator, so it was operator wages. He didn't in fact hire anybody. And instead, for this year in the budget, what they're going to do is Dave's going to create a working foreman in this year's budget. So it's sort of been pushed off for a year. And instead of having an operator, he's asking for a working foreman. I think one of the things is that Chris thinks that Dave is probably going to be retiring in the next 3 to 5 years. And so he's, I think, probably interested in seeing if he have somebody working with him that he could turn the highway department over to. And I don't know if this person that they're going to hire or what, I know nothing about that part of it, but just the reason why he's asking for a working foreman instead of an operator in the budget. Snow and ice, money just left over there. That's always, that's the free budget item of the snow and ice.
Okay, John.
Yep.
I have a question.
Okay.
I sort of get it because of the pandemic and whatever they had leftover funds. So I'm just curious for these additional expenses that we're covering, what happened to health insurance, or is this just?
Hey guys, I gotta step away for a minute. I got a dog outside and a bear, so.
Okay.
So I'm just curious,
Yeah. I'll tell you about,
so just what we're spending it on for each of these items and why that happens. So I'm just curious.
now, where's the money going to? The public building expense, the $48,000. Chris said that in the budget for this year, a custodian was budgeted, but they couldn't find one. So they contracted the business out, and there were higher COVID costs. So they contracted the business out, so it was one expense. And they had extra costs for cleaning because of COVID for the police and the ambulance that had been partially covered by some grants, but not for the rest of the town. So we wound up having extra cost for custodial work for the COVID cleaning that was not covered by any reimbursements. The second thing is that for public building expense was that on the library, the shingles blew off the library.
Mm-hmm.
That was an $85 expense. Plus, they had another problem that the people that they hired to do that did not put down a rain barrier over the previous repair, and so that's created another little mess. The third thing was that during the year they had an E. coli hit at the COA and the police station, and it took quite a bit apparently to get rid of all that. It started off, I think, at the police station, and it came and hit the COA building. So that's where the extra expenses came in for the public building expenses.
Okay.
The dispatch expense, it was just higher paid officers doing the overtime instead of dispatch people. When they have an opening there, anybody on the regular force can sign in for the opening, including the highly paid people on the force, and they all get overtime for that, even if it wouldn't have been overtime for the person who showed up there regularly. So that's the problem there. For the health insurance,
two other police expenses, even though it's a different department, we have public personnel services, and we have, we're pulling out an additional $35,000 on that budget, to fund last year's budget. But anyway, go ahead and finish. I'm just saying, I'm disappointed that it's on top of everything else. We got another chunk of money going to balance the police department budget. That's all.
yeah, that's a problem that a number of people are aware of. There's nothing they can do right now, but they're thinking about possible solutions. But it can't happen for them.
Okay.
The health insurance, it said it came because there was higher enrollment than anticipated, and so the costs are up. I asked a question about whether or not there would be any adjustment for the health insurance paid for school employees. Can that be adjusted retroactively? And the answer is no, it cannot. As well as items that's agreed upon ahead of time for the year by the town and the schools. And it's not allowed to be adjusted if actual costs come in lower or higher. There's another school issue Chris told me about, and it has to do partially with this year. Apparently, there's now going to be a third student who is going to be sent to Smith Voc. So that's another $17,000, $18,000 a year. So that's going to have to be budgeted someplace. And on that one, Chris said he's discovered that our costs for sending somebody to Smith Voc have not been reported by the school department. He thinks they're supposed to report those as being part of the town's contribution, and they have not been reported that way. So there's going to be some checking into seeing what's going there. But the end of the year report from last year to DESE did not have any of the costs that we paid to send people to Smith Voc included as part of the costs. So that's what I have for those items. If anybody has any questions, I'll see if I can remember anything which I didn't write down. But that's
No,
basically.
I just haven't. I'm just curious about authority. All of these items fall under, because it says I am seeking approval of these following interdepartmental, transfers and stuff. Is it our power because we have the transfer authority?
No, it has to do with a law passed last year that was similar to laws that have been passed in the past for operations in some extraordinary times. And it said that in the past years, the only ones I remember were some occasions where some extra money was voted for the school, or the amount of money that was voted for schools did not come in anywhere near what was in the original budget that was originally the governor's or House budget that we used at the time of the town meeting. And so an act was passed that allowed the town to authorize the expenditures of money by having a vote of the select board and a vote of the finance committee. And that stood in for having to call a special town meeting. So that's what's happened on these expenses, on this special transfers. It's the only time I remember these intergovernmental transfers without having a town. We've had them in past by transferring money at special town meeting between either projects or departments into other projects or departments. But last year was the first time I remember a department to department transfer, and it was done through the special act that allowed the finance committee and the select board to vote to do that, because it's awfully late in the year to try to call a special town meeting.
Yeah, are we losing that authority? I mean, was that just a temporary 1-year thing, or will this go on for a couple of years? Do we still have authority for next year, for example?
I have no idea. I don't know what the extent of the law was. Was a bit surprised that it was extended for this year too, but we hadn't been doing anything about it. So,
Hey, I'm happy to have a little extra power.
well,
So John, my only question is the savings, from the workman's compensation. I would imagine that's because people were not in office and we didn't have as many claims. Is that a claim savings, or is that because if we're spending money, and look, I don't think anybody's going to say no to the transfers, but if we're spending money on things by adding expense with money that we might not have next year, then does that, are we creating a hole in the future?
let's see, I didn't look up, I don't recall what we budgeted for workers' comp for this year compared to last year. But Chris said there were two contributing factors, and I didn't ask for a breakdown. One was that he did over budget on, you have to budget on a projected basis, and it was over budgeted on a projected basis was the first thing. And then the second thing, when the auditor came and told him how much we had to pay, he apparently used a different technique than the one that Chris was using for the budgeting in judging what the cost would be. And again, I didn't ask for a relative amount between those.
Okay,
Just
but according to this projection for workers' compensation fiscal year 2022, we're asking for a budget of $193,520, which is a $23,877 or 14% increase over last year, which we budgeted $169,643. And because the claims were so low, we're saying that we paid $80,000 less than the 169 or $89,000. Would that be correct, John? I mean, the 80,000 would
I don't
be
think claims has
because
anything
what
to
we
do with it.
budgeted wasn't spent.
It's just how many hours and what the rate is, and you calculate what you owe, and then you deduct what you've prepaid. There's claims doesn't come into it.
So that we budgeted more year over year, even though we're giving some of it back. So did we not have the net pay calculation when we did the budget? And is the budget this year too high?
Okay,
already?
but here's the crazy thing, is that if you look 1 year before, in 2020, we only budgeted $92,554. So we basically increased between 2020 and 2021. We budgeted basically $75,000 more for workers' comp. And we ended up, I guess, at 89,000, which is like 3,000 less than 2020. So I don't know. Anyway.
Well, I don't know. We've always just taken whatever the town administrator has made his calculation on, and he's got to make assumptions he's got to make some usage assumptions, but it hasn't been. We haven't run into the situation where for example, last springtime. Granby at one point was at a 22% unemployment rate. It was very, very high. And other places in the Commonwealth were similar, but it was very, very high. And so I can't imagine that you would go into putting together a budget and not take into account that might continue. At the budget time last year which was just right at the end of the fiscal year. COVID was still unknown as to what the prospects are, and so you probably had no question, but you had to budget somewhat conservatively. But apparently, the usage was much less than he thought.
Okay.
And I don't know what the basis was for calculating this coming year. Our unemployment is not that high this year.
I guess it's
Yeah,
possible.
this is workman's comp, right? Not unemployment.
Workers'
comp. Yeah, workers' compensation.
Well, I
Right,
guess
so-
because they were potentially treating COVID as an occupational hazard, maybe that's what everybody was saying. Okay, if it gets really bad and everybody can't work, or a lot of people get sick at work or whatever, we may have to treat that, at an occupational level, which would fall under workman's comp, because
That really doesn't apply. I mean, it's the hours worked, what the state rate is for that department, and it's just a calculation of hours and the rate. And then you compare it to what your projecting was, and you either owe or get money back.
Okay, I understand the calculation. I'm just sitting here saying, wow, from 2020 to 2021, we increased our workers' comp by $75,000. What was the motivating factor to have such a big jump? Because, you know, I mean, it's almost double. What drove that? That's all.
So there's an agreement between Chris and the insurance company that says, I think it's going to be this, and then you pay your premium based on the estimate.
Okay,
So-
so if we think it's that, then wouldn't we have paid all the $169,000 out already? So that we wouldn't
hard to-
have $80,000 left over and have actually only spent $89,000 on workman's comp instead, like 2020, where we spent 92 instead of 169. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We have to transfer, but I just have a curiosity about like what's driving such a big increase. And again, we're now increasing to 193,000 this year. So in 2 years, we've increased workers' comp budgeting by $100,000 a year. So anyway,
Have we hired more people in the, and or are they at a higher risk? How about the guys in the building maintenance? Maybe that's a higher rate.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's all possible. I mean, but it's something I think maybe we should just make a note of for next year's budget, cycle, to question the workman's comp budget number and understand it better. End of the day, the money's there. Other departments we need to transfer it to. So, I suggest we just move on with the business at hand and take a vote to do the transfer thing. I don't know what happened to John. John, we're looking at your desk now.
those are his notes for any reason. Yeah. Well,
There
I
we go,
would
yeah.
agree. I would just say, Rich, that if next year we do another transfer like this and there's another big chunk of money coming from workers' comp and we're transferring it over to health or something, then it'll be a red flag again. I mean, maybe the reality is what we budgeted under workers' comp was really a health insurance cost, was a COVID cost, and it should have been budgeted under health insurance to begin with.
So just ask Chris to see like a couple years of audits. It's like a one-page piece of paper. It's not really complicated.
Okay. Anyway, John, back to you.
Yeah, let me turn that on. Scott, do you happen to know, is there some kind of agreement made between a company and the state that there has to be an agreement about the calculation that you make for your estimate? Or are you strictly on your own for making an estimate?
So each person ends up in a category that the state agrees to. So let's say there's a driver or a mechanic or a teacher, whatever. And they each have an agreed on category and there's a rate for those people. And then you multiply what they earn times the rate, and that's your, in simplistic terms, and that's what you pay.
Is there, does an estimate come in as to what the usage will be?
I used to estimate roughly what the audit was if things aren't going to change. If all things being the same, you would pay roughly what you audited at, unless your payroll's going up or the rates are going up. Did I
The
answer
audit
your
for the
question?
previous year, you mean? The
I'm
audit that
sorry?
you did for the previous year, you would use whatever happened in the audit for the previous year or the current year in terms of figuring out what it is for next year. And then
Right.
are you the sole arbiter of that figure, or do you have to come to an agreement with
Well,
anybody?
I mean, if it's between you and the insurance company,
Okay. So you're not on your own in the assumptions.
well, I mean, you don't want a big number flying back either way, right? You don't want to pay money in and then get a big check back, and they don't want you to owe a lot of money. So you try to guess as accurately as you can.
Yeah, and have we had any big discrepancies in past years between amount paid and amount? I mean, you expect some over budgeting, particularly for a city or town. You don't want to under budget some of these things, because if you have to go back to a town meeting
Right.
and talk about it, people are going to ask questions about, well, why, who,
Right.
when, where, that kind of stuff.
You want to be conservative.
Yeah. I don't recall it being a big issue in the past. I mean, I'll check on this, but I don't recall it being a big issue, and suspect that it's really more of the whole COVID experience has created a lot of uncertainty, and people are just being very cautious in budgeting.
Were the hourly people at the town cut back for COVID?
I don't think so.
I know my daughter, who is aquatics director in Belchertown, everybody was kept in place. They were
Yeah.
paid their wages. Some weeks,
We know the
certainly there was
school
not
was,
enough
right?
work for all the hours, but they were paid their full wage. I would imagine Granby, I think it was all state municipal employees. That was the policy.
From what you said earlier, it sounds like it was just the auditor used a different calculation, which between that and a conservative estimate is probably what's going on.
Okay. All right, I've got the notes on questions. Any other questions occur to anybody? Any other issues? Bob? You're muted, Bob. You're muted. Still muted. There we go.
Now I'm talking.
Yep.
I touched it before. Obviously, I didn't touch it hard enough. A couple of years ago, the policeman was injured, lost an eye, as I remember, down at the
Oh.
academy.
Oh, yeah. That was,
And I think some of those charges were paid out of workers' comp to begin with, and that may have influenced the amount of money that was being budgeted, just to be on the safe side.
I forgot about that. That was a bad situation. Yeah.
And that could also affect your rate going forward too, which does come into play in the comp calculation. It's called the mod. If you have a lot of claims, then the mod goes up.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, then I'll take a vote to approve all of these interdepartmental transfer requests.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any other discussion about any of the points? If not, then all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. That's about all that I have, except I'll comment just a little bit. I sent you a copy of an email that I received from the assessors. And what's happened there is that you may know that the person who was in the assessor's office last year, Nicole, ran for the office of collector to replace Karen, and she won. And Nicole's position in the assessor's office was as an assistant assessor, I think. I was as an assessor's clerk. And the reason for that is that in order to have the title of assistant assessor, you have to get certified by the state. And being certified state means you have to pass a lot of courses. I think they're mostly computer courses. I don't know if they all are. And Nicole had been working her way through those. She apparently was working very diligently to be able to get to the point where she could qualify as an assistant assessor instead of assistant clerk. But she left the job and became the new collector at the last election. The previous person who had been in there left Granby and went to work for Longmeadow, East Longmeadow. And one of the reasons was that they offered a 40-hour job there. And but after working there for a few years, she now wants to cut back on her time. So when she heard that the position was possibly going to be open here in Granby, she got in touch with the assessors, and they were delighted to have her back. She had been, though, at a higher salary level and a higher. She's qualified as an assistant assessor. She has, in fact, been hired just starting this last Monday, and they have enough money in their budget because they've gone 4 or 5 weeks without the assessor's clerk position. So they have enough money to take care of their budget needs for this year. But for next year, the money was only budgeted for this assistant clerk salary and not assistant assessor. So they need more money. So that'll come to us after the year starts. I think probably the best thing is just to treat this as a transfer request from the reserve fund. But again, it has nothing to do with fiscal 21. It has to do with fiscal year 22, and they do have money budgeted for a good portion of the time. So that I've talked to both Chris and somebody from the assessor's office about that. I also asked Chris whether there will be any transfer requests from the reserve fund for the rest of the year. You see, he doesn't think there'll be any. He thinks that these are all the transfers that are going to need to take place. There could be some last minute problems as always, but if things go as expected, we would not have any other transfer requests. They have to be incurred during this fiscal year, and then the business of them has to be taken care of during the first 10 business days of the following fiscal year. But again, I've been told not to expect any. So anybody got anything else? I hope this wraps up 2021 for us. I do want to get back to everybody and write up something for the select board, some other people about what happens with retired teachers' health care. It's never actually seen anywhere in the budget that the public sees because it's a charge taken right off the top by the state. And I don't think people even realize that. And there is a place Bob has found and showed me where the place is on the state reports. You can check and see which towns report it and which towns don't. And our town doesn't because we're not allowed to. The law and all the surrounding communities that people like to use for comparisons on net school spending purposes all report that. So that's either the number which can be very deceptive or downright misleading. So I want to get back to that sometime soon, but not in the next week or so.
Is there a mechanism to enable that reporting in the future?
No.
No,
There's
there
no
was
option.
a couple of years ago.
Okay. Oh, well.
All right. If nobody's got any questions, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.